Hey everybody, I forgot to check in last night, so I hope your weekend has started well. And I'm wondering how everyone with kids is going at home. And I once pondered the idea of homeschooling. Now I've got this opportunity, I'm not so sure it's for me. Now I only have one daughter, Violet, and she's 5, but man, she can definitely drive me nuts, especially when she's in my space all the time. I'm the type of person who likes a lot of my own space. And I feel it's really important to recognize our own needs for space, and that it doesn't mean that you love your child any less for not being there all the time. And of course, for us, there's always someone in the vicinity of her if needed. The thing that I really love about kids, and I use them as an example with my patients a lot of the time, is that especially when they're your own, is that they can be really great triggers for you and a great reflection of what you say, especially when they use your own words against you. It can be quite funny sometimes, but they teach us a lot about ourselves and the barriers that we can put up for ourselves. It's also amusing when they question why we behave a certain way or ask them to behave a particular way. I think it's great that they bring this to our attention and that sometimes we do actually need to listen to them. And I think that we should answer them with a reason so that they can understand where we're coming from and not just respond with, because I told you so. And now I do say that sometimes though, don't worry. Kids are really great expressors. They don't care yet what people think about them. And it's often us as parents that teach them what is acceptable and what's not. And as adults, that comes down to our own stories, fears, and our beliefs. So our right and wrong is not always the best, but it's what we know. So the things that I often see come up in adults is that as a child they were told it wasn't okay to cry, and that it really isn't okay to be angry. And for some, they were criticised for being too loud and expressing joy. So let's talk about tantrums. This is a really great example of an emotional release. I talk a lot about emotions getting stored in your body, so we also want to learn about how to release them. And I love a good tantrum in a child. Yes, it can be really embarrassing for some. There's lots of thoughts like wondering what are other people thinking of you while your kid is having a tantrum, and thinking, what are you doing wrong? So for those who get emotional release, you'll understand why a child does this and be able to hold space for them during their tantrum. And actually, as adults, we also have tantrums, some bigger than others, but it's the perception that we shouldn't, because we're adults, that we should always be able to control our emotions. And emotions and feelings build up in us, and they need to move in and out again, or they sometimes get stored in our tissues. And this is where I talk about your physical discomfort or injuries or illness forming because of that stored chronic emotion. And everyone has a different capacity to cope with certain emotions, and we see this a lot with stress. And they can cope until they can't cope anymore. And this is where kids can teach us a lot about their coping mechanisms and the need to release. So kids have a much more limited capacity to cope with emotions because their brain is still developing and learning. So when it gets too much, they need to release it, and they just let it rip. So it may start as whinging or whining, and then it can turn to the screaming and crying, or the hysterics, and even some physical acts as well. The other end of the spectrum is intense laughter. So for me, instead of questioning why my child is having a tantrum and why she isn't so well behaved all the time, I allow space for her to do her thing. I don't try and shush her or discipline her. And yes, I do get frustrated when there's tantrums sometimes. However, I try and always take a step back, realize it's not a personal attack on me, but that I try and think about what has led her to feeling this way, and I just let her rip. So when babies are quite small, they often have the witching hour in the evening, and that could be because we've overstimulated them during the day or haven't met their needs quite to their expectations, even though they're a little baby. So For my daughter, she needs to discharge this energy, and a lot of the time she's a pretty awesome giggler. She has the best laugh. It's one of my favorite sounds, and it's definitely her preference to have a good laugh. Some of you might be aware of laughing yoga that's out there, and it's just infectious. And sometimes she will ask us to give her a tickle to help her giggle, or she wants to play the giggle game. Or she might ask for a massage, and when I massage certain points on her, she will giggle, and she wants me to keep going until she's let it all go. And for Violet, I can also pick up when she's getting really irritated with the situation and catch it earlier before it gets to that tantrum. So I've talked with her and I let her know it's okay to feel angry and frustrated because these are normal and okay emotions, but let's discharge it before it becomes a problem. So I'll sit there with her and let her scream her head off. I hold space for her to do this, and often it will then just switch to laughter. So instead of getting to the almighty and unexpected tantrum, we try and release that pressure. And that comes down to being aware when it's building, seeing the signs and symptoms of it, rather than waiting until it gets to the point of this is too much and the explosion. So I've talked a lot about kids' emotions, but we can definitely take a leaf out of their book and practice discharging these energies ourselves and discharging these emotions on a regular basis. So I would love you to start thinking about what your emotional tendency is. There's kind of 6 very basic human emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust. And we will often experience all of these in our life, but we may lean into one more so when we're not in a good space. Anger, disgust, and fear are often, and sadness as well, are often not encouraged, but they are part of our makeup and need to be accepted to a degree. It's not an excuse to live in these constant emotional states, especially if they don't serve you. And they can get to the point where they start to harm others and harm yourself. We also need to learn to discharge these emotions in a healthy way when it all gets too much. So this might be learning your own practice of discharging, which we'll go over down the track. It can be seeing a trusted therapist who can hold space for you. For me, I love it when people cry, scream, swear, all sorts of stuff comes out of them on the treatment table. I like to facilitate that release and hold space for them and let them know it's okay. They don't need to understand what emotion's going on, but I really feel it's important to discharge that. Or it might be that you have that great social network of friends who have the capacity to listen to you and hold space for you. So have a think about that and how we can use kids as an example for discharging emotions and not storing them in our body anymore. And over time, we'll go over more around emotional release, a bit more. Hi, Beck. All right, I'll see you guys. Have a great weekend.